BYD just told the entire UK car industry something it didn't want to hear, and the numbers back it up. While Stella Lee, one of BYD's top executives, sat down with reporters in London and said the price war coming out of China is, in her words, not sustainable. Her own company was quietly doing the exact opposite of slowing down. In the same stretch of months, BYD overtook Tesla in Europe. It became the best-selling EV brand in Britain, and it did all of that while being locked out of the government's own electric car grant. Read that again. The UK handed out subsidies to help people buy electric cars, and BYD wasn't even on the list. It won anyway. So let's actually sit with that for a second, because on paper, that shouldn't be possible. Here's the setup. Earlier this year, more than 12,000 BYD EVs were registered in Britain in just 4 months. That's over 7% of the entire EV market, and it put BYD ahead of Tesla, ahead of Kia, ahead of BMW, ahead of Volkswagen. Brands that have been selling cars in this country for decades. Brands with dealer networks older than some of BYD's engineers. And BYD did it as, essentially, a newcomer. It only launched here in March 2023. By the middle of this year, the picture got even more uncomfortable for the old guard. Almost 38,000 BYD vehicles registered in the first half of 2026 alone. 95% up on the year before. Nearly 9% of the combined battery electric and plug-in hybrid market. One single month, June, saw over 6,000 cars go out the door. And the company's deputy country manager didn't exactly sound humble about it either. He said, more or less, "We're going into the second half determined to do even better." That's not the tone of a brand playing catch-up. That's the tone of a brand that knows it's already won the argument, and it keeps stacking up. Not long after that half-year figure came out, BYD quietly passed a bigger milestone. 100,000 vehicles registered in Britain in under 3 years since the brand even existed here. Started with a single model, the Atto 3, back in March 2023. Now it's 10 models deep, spanning hatchbacks, saloons, SUVs and hybrids, with a dealer network that's expanded just as fast as the sales figures. Look at the wider EV segment, and the picture gets almost uncomfortable for everyone else. BYD's share of the battery and plug-in hybrid market climbed past 23%, growing close to 95% year-on-year, while the segment itself was already growing at over 30%. It's not just winning a shrinking pie. It's winning a pie that's expanding and still taking a bigger slice of it than anyone thought possible 18 months ago. Now here's where it gets interesting, because at the exact same time all of this was happening in Britain, Stella Lee was in London, telling Bloomberg that the very price war her own company helped start isn't sustainable. She called it extreme, tough competition. She said consolidation is coming, that smaller rivals will get squeezed out. And she's not wrong, by the way. BYD's own profits in China took a hit because of it, a 30% drop in 1 quarter. Then another drop the quarter after that. So picture the contradiction here. A company that triggered a price war so brutal it's cutting into its own profits at home, turns around and says, in Europe we're not slowing down. We're doing the opposite. $20 billion. That's the figure Lee put on the table for BYD's investment plans across Europe over the coming years. $20 billion. While simultaneously admitting the very strategy funding that expansion is, by her own words, not sustainable long-term. You don't need to be an economist to feel the tension in that. And Stella Lee isn't the only one inside BYD saying quiet parts out loud. Wang Chuanfu, the company's chairman, described the state of the industry as a fever pitch, heading into what he called a brutal knockout stage. Not a metaphor he needed to reach for. He's watched the domestic market chew through smaller rivals already, with one competitor's founder predicting the shakeout in China alone could leave just 5 survivors out of more than 100 brands currently fighting for space. That's the environment BYD is exporting its confidence out of. A war zone at home, funding an expansion abroad. Wang also pointed to something worth sitting with. BYD now operates in 119 countries, backed by what he called a technology dream team of over 120,000 engineers. That's not a car company anymore, in the traditional sense. That's closer to an industrial machine that happens to build cars, among everything else. And British car buyers are noticing, not because of some marketing campaign, but because of what's sitting on driveways now. The Seal U DMI became the best-selling plug-in hybrid in the country. The Seal Saloon became BYD's top battery electric seller here. New models kept landing. The Sea Lion 5, the 802, a compact SUV starting under £27,000. And there's more coming. A 7-seat SUV with a genuinely quick 0 to 62 time. A pickup. A super mini that undercuts almost everything else on the market. This isn't one lucky model carrying the brand. It's a full lineup, hitting from multiple directions at once, and it keeps growing. The Shark pickup, a 7-seat TI7, built for family buyers who'd normally look at a Land Rover or a Kia Sorento, a Dolphin G Super Mini aimed squarely at the cheapest end of the market. All of them arriving with what BYD calls its super hybrid technology under the DM badge. You don't launch that many models into one country in such a short space of time, unless you're planning to stay for a very long while. Meanwhile, the traditional players are watching their share slip. Volkswagen and BMW both reported losses at the top of the market this year. Audi and MG picked up some of the gap, but BYD didn't just gain ground. It became the actual leader of the EV segment in Britain, climbing past Tesla entirely, with growth close to 95% year-on-year. Tesla's growth, for comparison, sat around 22%. Good growth on a normal day. Against BYD, it looks almost stationary. It helps to remember what this market actually looked like before any of this started. British new car sales peaked back in 2016 at around 2.6 million. Then came the long, slow decline, production shifting to cheaper corners of Europe, Brexit adding friction on top of that, and then the pandemic knocking the whole market down to 1.6 million by 2020. It never really snapped back. A tiny rise in 2021, a small drop again in 2022, years of a market that felt, frankly, stuck. Add to that an economy that's only expected to grow by less than 1% this year, inflation pushing back up toward 4%, and household budgets that are tight enough as it is. That's the ground BYD landed on. Not a booming market hungry for a new player, a tired one looking for literally any reason to get excited again. And BYD gave it one. Now, let's talk about that grant situation, because it's honestly one of the strangest parts of this whole story. The UK government set up the electric car grant to make EVs more affordable for ordinary buyers. Sounds sensible, but BYD's models were excluded from it, not eligible, meaning every single one of those tens of thousands of BYD sales this year happened without the government sweetener that some competitors got to use as a selling point. Think about what that actually means for a second. BYD didn't need the grant to win. It won on price, on range, on the sheer size of its lineup, and frankly on timing, arriving right as British buyers were getting nervous about fuel prices and increasingly open to something new. One of BYD's own selling points here has been its super hybrid technology, cars that can do close to 935 miles on a full tank. For a country full of drivers doing long motorway stretches, that number lands differently than a flashy 0 to 60 stat ever could. Price is where all of this really bites, though. The Dolphin, One of BYD's smaller models undercut several cars marketed as budget options here, coming in at around £335 a month on salary sacrifice. It's not the absolute cheapest. The Dacia Spring still holds that spot on outright list price, and the MG4 sits close behind. But BYD isn't trying to win on being the single cheapest badge on the forecourt. It's trying to win on being cheap enough, while offering more car, more tech and more range, than what's sitting next to it at a similar price. Compare that to a brand like XPeng, whose entry point into Europe starts closer to £40,000, and you start to see why BYD's approach is landing so differently with ordinary buyers, rather than early adopters chasing the newest badge on the block. So when analysts warn that a price war could spill into the UK, that framing almost undersells what's already happening, Peter Golding, the CEO of FleetCheck, put it plainly. If BYD and other Chinese brands are willing to slash prices by over 30% at home, what exactly is stopping them from doing the same thing here? The EU raised tariffs on Chinese EVs. The US effectively shut the door. Britain, so far, hasn't. That's not a small detail. That's the entire reason this story is unfolding the way it is. And this is where Stella Lee's comment stops being just a quote from an interview and starts looking like a warning shot. Because if the person actually running BYD's international strategy is telling Bloomberg on the record that the pricing approach fueling all of this can't continue forever, then either prices go up eventually or someone else in this market gets squeezed out first. And given how the last 2 years have gone for brands like Citroën, Fiat and Seat, who've already watched BYD's sales figures blow past theirs, it's not hard to guess who's more exposed. Go back even further, and the pattern's already there. In the first 3 months of this year, BYD registered over 21,000 vehicles in the UK, according to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. March alone brought over 15,000 of those, a record month for the brand, giving it close to 4% of the entire new car market. Not just the EV segment, the entire market, every fuel type included. And within the battery and plug-in hybrid space specifically, its share that month pushed past 11%. That's before the stronger half-year numbers even landed. This wasn't a one-off spike. It was the start of a pattern that just kept repeating quarter after quarter. And it's not just the small, struggling brands who should be paying attention. Think about what BYD has already done to the pecking order among the bigger names. It's outselling Kia, outselling BMW. It's already ahead of Volkswagen in the EV segment specifically, a brand that spent the better part of a century building the kind of trust BYD is now eating into within a couple of sales quarters. There's a phrase people in the industry keep repeating almost nervously, that the Chinese brands aren't just competing anymore, they're compounding. Every new model, every extra dealership, every headline about record sales feeds into the next one. It becomes self-reinforcing, and once a brand hits that kind of momentum in a market this size, it's genuinely difficult to slow down from the outside. There's also a quieter signal buried in all of this. BYD isn't putting all its energy into slashing prices in Europe the way it has in China. It's investing $20 billion into the region, into dealer networks, into new models built specifically with European and British buyers in mind. That's a different playbook than a straightforward race to the bottom. It's closer to a long game, undercut just enough to win trust and market share quickly, then build the kind of infrastructure that makes leaving difficult for the customer. If you're into cars, whatever side of this you're on, you'll want to see where this goes next. Hit subscribe. We cover moves like this across the whole industry, not just the EV side of it. So where does that leave the rest of the market? Rivals aren't just sitting there. XPeng's boss has publicly said he doesn't see a full-blown price war coming to Europe the way it hit China, arguing that European buyers respond to different things than buyers in Southeast Asia or emerging markets. Maybe that's true. Or maybe that's exactly what someone says right before the numbers prove otherwise. There's a bigger question hiding underneath all of this too, and it's one that doesn't get asked enough. What happens to the people who build cars here, not just the ones who buy them? BYD doesn't manufacture in the UK. Its cars arrive built, shipped in, sold through an expanding but still relatively young dealer network. Compare that to the legacy names losing ground, brands with actual factories, actual supply chains, actual jobs tied to every single unit sold. Every percentage point BYD takes isn't just a number on a sales chart. Somewhere down the line, it's a factory shift that doesn't get scheduled, a supplier contract that doesn't get renewed. That's not a reason to root against a good product. But it's the part of this story that rarely makes it into the headline. Here's the part that should actually worry the legacy brands the most, though. BYD isn't winning in Britain because of one clever discount campaign. It's winning because it showed up with 10 different models covering nearly every segment, backed by a factory advantage that lets it build cars cheaper than almost anyone else on the planet. And it's doing that while telling the world, quite openly, that its own core strategy is unsustainable. That's either supreme confidence in the beginning of a very calculated retreat into something more profitable. Time will tell which one it actually is. What's clear right now is this. The UK car market spent decades getting used to a certain order, German engineering at the top, Japanese reliability in the middle, British heritage names hanging on wherever they could. That order is being rewritten quietly, one registration plate at a time, by a company that didn't exist as a serious global car maker a decade ago. Tell me in the comments, do you think BYD's growth in Britain is sustainable long-term, or is this the calm before a much bigger shake-up? I read every single one, and if this got you thinking, share it with someone who's been eyeing an EV and wondering what's actually happening in this market. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There's a lot more of this coming.